And when Brett showed me the numbers on his spreadsheet, his numbers were at least double everything that I could show my clients. So one of the things I tell folks is that I didn't grow up in real estate, but I married into real estate. And what I mean by that is my father-in-law was an attorney by trade, but if you spoke with him, and he would tell you that he made all of his money really in real estate. And being in real estate is like saying you're a doctor, right? What are you a doctor of? And there's a lot of ways to make money in real estate. And for him in particular, I mean, he's had multi-use buildings, with retail on the bottom and rentals on the top. He's had vacation rentals, low-income housing. So anyhow, when I met my wife, and like we were dating, or even as we were married in our early years, like sitting around the table, like after church on Sunday, like having lunch, like you'd always just kind of hear about a deal that Brad was working on, and it was one of those things that just kind of like sometimes you'd get together for Thanksgiving and Christmas and Easter and the same deal. Like he's still working on the same deal. Like it wasn't. Sometimes these deals took a year or two to like put the deal together, but overall. I knew that ultimately what caught my interest was the passive income. Like I wanted passive income. And sometimes I say it's residual income. It's not passive, right? It takes work. So that's what kind of got my interest. Was here was a man that I saw that was fairly successful in his own right, that he built wealth during his own lifetime. It wasn't generational money, that it was something that he accomplished on his own. And I just kind of looked at that and said, well, this guy's done something right. And so if he's done something right, like what can I learn from him? And I can do that too. And so I knew that I didn't want to trade time for money. And I knew that for me, like real estate was the way to do that. So I got started in real estate when my wife and I got married in 2004. And early on, before we were married, my wife had started first. So she had approached my father-in-law and said, "Hey, we're paying all this money at college to rent. Why don't we buy a house and I'll play property manager and I'll rent it to all my roommates?" And so she was the house manager, and she essentially lived for free, right? And all of the expenses were divided up amongst the other college kids, and her fee was that she lived for nothing versus paying the college for her housing. So when we got married, that concept was already something that she was open to. And so right out of the gate, like we had this beautiful townhouse, and we didn't need all the space. So if you don't mind sharing your house, like I didn't know it was called house hacking at the time, but we started off with house hacking. And Faith had a college roommate that needed a place to stay. She was from I forget one of the countries in Africa, and her family that had sponsored her was down in Rochester, and she needed a place to stay, so we rented her a room. And after that, there was a season where my sister needed a room, and we rented a room to her. And so that was kind of our start. I would say that like that first deal, like the numbers weren't awesome for being like an investment property. But again, being open to creative ways of making income. Fast forward a couple of years, and I got a job that required me to move. And when I took that job, we rented out our townhouse. And that was the first time where it really sunk in, and like I really got hooked on real estate, because here was this house, and we ended up renting it out to like 6 college girls or something to this effect. And the numbers weren't right from a cash flow perspective. I mean, we were probably just barely paying the bills. Maybe there was $100 or $150 a month, something like that. But my equity pay down. And so when I saw that somebody else was buying my house for me at like $400, $500, $600 a month, that got me excited, right? Newly married, young, poor, relatively, just out of college, and somebody else was making me $500 every month. That was a pretty big chunk of money. So once I saw that, that's when I started to understand that at the end of that year, let's say it was $500 a month, right? At the end of that year, somebody bought me $6,000 of a house. And that was something I was interested in. Instead of moving into back into our townhouse, I looked at my wife and I'm like, look, this is already rented. We're like, somebody's buying this house for us. We're collecting rent checks. I was starting a new career as a financial advisor, and I'm like, let's go live below our means and let somebody else keep paying for our townhouse. So we actually went and rented a room from a friend, even though we owned like a 4 or 5 bedroom townhouse, 3 bath. We went and rented like a little, like probably barely like a 10 by 12 bedroom in somebody's basement for a few $100 a month. Like it was like $400 a month. And meanwhile, we were collecting rent for probably, $1,800 on our house, and we lived in that basement for a year as I started my business as a financial advisor. So after I had my first taste in real estate, I knew that it was something that I wanted to do. I saw it as a means for building wealth and also building, some income. So what happened after that was, right probably about the time that all of these HGTV shows started becoming popular, and just like everybody, I'm sitting at home watching, I'm thinking, well, I can do that, right? So it was, I want to say it was 2005, 2006. And the timing was perfectly wrong. And I decided that we were going to buy a house and flip it. And I got a partner on the deal, and we bought a house out in Big Lake. I knew that there were some numbers that you were supposed to know, but I didn't really know what those numbers exactly were, right? And we bought this property was, like bank owned, and we bought it, and planned on putting about $20,000 into it, and then we were planning on flipping it and selling it, and that was our plan. One of the things I tell everybody about real estate is, in my experience there was, I didn't know what I didn't know, right? And one of the things I didn't know was to have multiple exit strategies. And so like all of my time, all of my money went into that house, and we made it pristine, but it was right as the housing market started to crash. And as we were wrapping up the house, we were losing value every single month faster than the value we were putting into it. Even after putting 20 grand into the house and all of our time for like months, the house was worth less than what we had bought it for, right, pre-renovations. So that was my first attempt at a flip. And the good part of that was that I had a partner. And what I mean by that was it was half of the burden versus all of the burden. And our only plan was to flip. And so we listed it, and we waited and waited and waited, and we couldn't get our price. And we were afraid to rent because what if somebody came in and trashed it? I spent like all of our savings, every spare nickel was already there. And so like the risk of renting it, like if somebody would go through that house and punch a hole like in every wall or bust out all the windows, like it was fear, right? Like I didn't have the money to fix that. Or if somebody rented it and the kid ran through the walls with crayons, so instead of renting the property and holding it, we sat there with a vacant property on the market, just writing checks. We had a short-term loan from the bank, and we were writing checks every month. And again, like it was just lighting money on fire. And we held on to it for as long as we could. And then ultimately we had to sell it at a loss. And I always tell everybody it's not my proudest moment by any stretch of the imagination. It's probably the hardest. It was the hardest life learning moment to kind of swallow your pride. I tell everybody I didn't know I had that much money to lose at that age. But that's where we were. And so that experience in 06 kind of put a calm on my fervor for real estate investing. In 2014, I met a realtor, an investor friend of mine, and my wife and I met him I was a financial advisor. I was out visiting a client, and I was in a kind of a rougher area, and I looked at my GPS, and I said, this is a rough area, but I got a little time. I'm going to go look at some houses. And I looked at my GPS, and I saw water, and I thought, I didn't even know where I was. I'm like, if you get closer to water, the houses are going to get nicer. And so I just drove towards the GPS, towards the water. And as I drove up to the Mississippi River. And I found this gorgeous little house, 1952 Rambler on a 1-acre lot sitting on the Mississippi River. And I fell in love with it and called the agent and that had it for sale and said, my wife and I wanted to come look at it. And so long story short, met the guy. My wife and I bought this house. I tell everybody the house was nothing what I wanted. The lot was everything, right? It's like when we bought it, it was a 2-bedroom, 1-bath house, and but the river was awesome. I mean, the view, that was just to die for, and so we bought that house. And in the process, I met my friend Brett, and Brett was just one of those people that when I met him, I knew that we were going to do business together in the future. We both kind of said that. Like, again, I was a little bit younger. I didn't have a lot of money. But the way we thought, I was like, we're going to do business together in the future. And he kind of felt the same thing. So that was 2014. Fast forward a couple of years and, life goes on and your income goes up and you build some cash reserves. And one day Brett calls and he says, would you be interested in going in on a house with me? And I said, I'd be interested in that. And for me, I'm a big fan of partnering. I'm a big fan of collaborating. All of, the age-old, all of something, or all of nothing, right? Or half of something or half of nothing. And so in this case, I'm a big fan of partnering where, well, at least it's half of something. But it's also not that big hit, just like when I had the other property. If you lose, you lose big too. So Brett introduced me to this opportunity to purchase a property. And it really was our first property that we bought for real estate investing purposes. What Brett showed me was he had a spreadsheet. And another thing of partnering with people is I always tell people Brett's a smarter guy than me. Anything that Brett thinks is a good idea, I'm down for it. So he's a very accomplished individual, very smart individual, very business savvy. And so he approached me to partner on this deal. And he showed me his spreadsheet. And when I saw the numbers, at this point, I had been a financial advisor for about 8 years. And so I've done a lot of long-term planning for my clients, and I knew strategically the wealth building strategies that I was using, the averages that I could use to safely prepare and help build wealth for my clients to retire in, 20 or 30 years. And when Brett showed me the numbers on his spreadsheet, his numbers were at least double everything that I could show my clients for a conservative long-term retirement planning portfolio. And so when I saw those numbers, I thought, well, I can do this. That was, the beginning of the end for me. Again, financial services, great business. People need that. There's different elements there. There's great opportunities. The type of business that I was running was a more conservative model. Folks that want to study and invest in stocks, bonds, do their own thing. I think that there's great opportunities there. For me, though, that was the transition to real estate because I knew that I could control my outcome. A couple of the things that Brett introduced me to that I wasn't utilizing in the financial advising world, the power of leverage, right? I mean, I knew what debt was. But when I really understood how leverage impacted the return on investment, your cash on cash return, when you control a $100,000 asset with 20% down, with 20 grand, and if that $100,000 asset goes up by 10%, you just made 10 grand on your 20 grand investment on just appreciation alone. Never mind if your 20 grand on your $100,000 asset generates a $1,000 a month rent check, you're making 12 grand gross on your 20 grand investment. And so when you start putting these numbers together, where you have appreciation, you have depreciation, you have other business benefits, tax reductions for your expenses, because you already have a cell phone, you're already driving your car some, you've got various other expenses. You start putting in the ability of that leverage, and your return goes way up. And that was part of that number that once I saw it, it just kind of changed me. And so when I met Brett, and he showed me that was our first deal in this house in New Hope, and that became sort of my floor. Like, that became my gold standard, because again, I knew he was a smart guy, and I knew that if it was good enough for Brett, it would be good enough for me. But then I decided that if that's where I'm starting, and I'm happy with those numbers, I want every deal to hit that. That became what was my ceiling became my floor. And so when I moved from financial advising into real estate investing, and I moved into this higher targeted return, that became my floor. That became my gold standard. Every deal that I looked at for after that, I wanted it to at least produce in a variety of different financial categories at that level or above. And so that was 2016. In every deal that I've done since then, from a buy and hold perspective, when I've been targeting, my returns have been at or above that level. So after Brett introduced me to that deal, I was hooked for life. As it turned out, with that property in particular, one of the things that was kind of unique about the property and the deal, it was, he brought me in as a financial partner, but he actually had really teed up the deal. What he brought to me were two things. One is this property, but in his case, he also had a relationship with a national residential group home healthcare provider, and that was to be the tenant. And so the reason he had reached out to me was, he and his wife had been investing for many, many years, and but they had kind of tapped out their Fannie and Freddie loans. And so he said, here's the deal. Would you like to go in and be a 50-50 partner with me? I'm going to bring the house I've got a house already lined up. I've got a client already lined up, part of the down payment, and you'd bring the financing to the table in the relationship. And in this particular case, Brett and I were good friends, and I knew that he was somebody that I could trust and do business with. And so my wife and I felt comfortable taking on the debt in this particular case in our name and going forward in that relationship. And I at that time, it was our first deal. We drafted a one-page document to document our business relationship. And I had successfully been in and out of other business relationships with folks, good solid folks, where I felt like that was sufficient for us, and an agreement on paper. And the one thing that I said to Brett at the time, again, I was the younger, less financially strong partner in the deal. And I said, Brett, I really want to do this, but here's the deal. We determined we agreed on a set goal and outcome. So one, we agreed that it was a buy and hold property, and that the intention was to hold the property going forward. Secondly, we agreed that our goal was that it was to be this group home with this particular type of tenant in the property. And so as long as we had that client or that tenant in the property, that was meeting one of our objectives. We weren't necessarily interested in renting to just anyone. We wanted to work with these other business-to-business relationships. So that was another objective of what we agreed on. The third thing was something that was important to me that I said to him, which was, Brett, here's the deal. I'm younger, I'm less financially strong. I'm willing to take this risk. I'm willing to commit my down payment, take on the note responsibilities, but this is part of my reserve in my reserve fund for my wife and I. We have other reserves, but it was a large chunk of it at the time. And so I said to him, here's the deal. We have to have an agreement that if at any point that if I have to do a capital call and I can't, for whatever reason, my wife and I need to get our down payment out of this property, there has to be an exit strategy that we pre-agreed to. And so we agreed. We agreed that if that were the case, at that time, we would get if that day ever came, we would get a appraisal at that time, and either A, he would buy me out for my half, or B, we could sell it on the open market if I needed to get my capital out. And for me, going back to the importance of partnering with other people, for me, that gave me the assurance to be able to step out and be brave to get started, knowing that there was going to be an exit. So that was an important part. Today we still own that property. Brett and I look at deals together and have conversations about the market, and we do deals. There's no plan on us getting rid of that property. We actually the tenant, the group home tenant, had signed an original 4-year lease, which was another awesome part of that deal. They just renewed for a 5-year lease. So, we're on a 9-year string right now where this property will be leased by the same tenant. So after that first deal, because of our client, the tenant being the group home, that really got me interested. It has gone so well that I decided early on that that's where I wanted to specialize. So going forward, I have specialized in renting to group homes or home-based, community-based home health care, assisted living facilities, working directly with the Department of Health, with the state. In all of these homes, there are case managers that are available to the clients. There are healthcare workers. The business itself is managing the care of these folks. The great part about that is not only does the tenant has a vested interest in the property as well, right? They're a small business. Sometimes you're working with big companies, sometimes you're working with small ones. Particularly the small ones, I'm working with another entrepreneur, another business to business. And those folks have a vested interest in their business doing well, which means my property gets taken care of. It means it needs to be clean. The maintenance needs to be up. And it's worked out that we have aligned interests because the tenant, the business owner wants a property that they can be proud of and bring their residents in to attract their business. So, one, my house is well cared for. 2, there's additional levels of oversight, right? The business has a cleaning schedule. The business has to get licensed by the state. So every so often the state comes in and inspects the property. So never mind, the city of Minneapolis doing a rental inspection. These folks already have an inspection that's even more meticulous than that for their license for healthcare. So it's been a great business model. Going forward, I'm almost embarrassed sometimes to tell people because I haven't had the crazy phone calls in the middle of the night where, plunging the toilets or, whatever, can't fight their way out of a wet paper bag. I don't get calls, and when they do call and they want something, well, I gladly want to provide an excellent product for them because I know that if they're happy, they're going to stay. And so instead of I see my relationship with my tenants that we have, again, aligned interests. And so we partner together to create like an awesome environment for the residents. So going forward, that's where I'm at. Like I love this space. I love the relationship. I love the long-term leases. I love, working with and partnering with others to provide quality housing to folks that need a place to live.